Hail thee well, and welcome all. I'm the Jacob of all trades, and on this episode of my Dungeon Master Masterclass, we're going to be talking about creating unique encounters. I wanted to do this video next because it corresponds very nicely with the last episode of my Avatar Journal series, where they were in the village of Pinyao fighting this lava flow that was threatening to engulf the village. And I also wanted to talk about this because it's an incredibly useful mechanic that can be implemented in almost any scenario, or a lot of different scenarios. And I'm going to be talking to you about how you can do something like this in your own game. A unique encounter? Well, aren't all encounters kind of unique in their own way? Well, absolutely, yes. Encounters are going to vary. The number of combatants in the fight and the skill level of the combatants and the danger level and the environment and all of those things are obviously subject to change, but a lot of the times I find that, your standard combat can come up bland occasionally. It can come off, very stale, with the players just waiting until it's their turn to make an attack, and then that's all they do for the round. And if they miss, then that can get pretty tiresome, especially after the third or fourth miss in a row. So I have developed a slew set of rules for creating these unique encounters, which are meant to challenge your players and give them more to do on their turn, or give them at least more options so that they could possibly follow through on their turn. And I think it provides for a much more interesting encounter and a lot more challenging in a lot of ways. So let's talk about some of these loose rules for creating a unique encounter then. The first thing that I do when I create a unique encounter is I set some constraint on the encounter, and typically this is a time limit of some sort, but there are other kinds of constraints, or rules you could call them. You could also call them rules, because because it's a unique encounter, sometimes it can be more like a game inside the game, and it can help to have rules for that game so that your players are able to interact with it more. And we'll talk more about that as well. But the second thing that I do when creating these unique encounters is that I also incorporate victory or defeat conditions, and these kind of go with the constraints or the rules of the encounter as well. And these are just the guidelines, like, hey, what do you need to do to win this encounter? How do you beat the game? How do you win the game? And then what happens? What happens if your enemy gets their conditions met? That's your defeat. If they manage to win the game, then you lose the game, obviously. Only one winner, one loser. Typically, I mean, it's Dungeons and Dragons, anything can happen. But typically with these unique encounters, I build them to be fairly black and white. It's pretty static. Because of the way these encounters are built, they very closely resemble skill challenges, if you are familiar with skill challenges. It's very much kind of like that, with the players coming up with their own ideas for what they should try to do to succeed. The classic example is the collapsing castle around you, or the collapsing dungeon. You need to, there's a skill challenge. You have to accumulate enough successes trying to escape this dungeon before you accumulate so many failures, which represents you being buried alive in this dungeon as it collapses on top of you. So it's kind of like that, and maybe a skill challenge falls into a unique encounter, but there's it's much wider than that. I feel like there's a lot more possibilities encompassed with this idea. So now we're gonna get into it now. First things first, I'm gonna tell you when you might want to use one of these unique encounters. And I typically like to use them during combat. As I said, combat can get stale after a while if you're doing the same things over and over again, and I like to incorporate these unique encounters every once in a while to mix things up a little bit, and to get my players to think outside of the box. It also forces them to think and work together. They really have to reconsider the situation, especially if you've created some rules for it. It forces them to work within the confines of those rules, and it can allow for some very interesting play. These unique encounters also work very well with sieges, I think. If either on defense or offense, I think that a unique encounter can be very successful. As I said, there's a lot of different uses for them. I used them for the Pinyao lava flow, as I mentioned earlier. That was a great example of a unique encounter. Typically, they're useful anytime you have a situation where you think it might be difficult or challenging to actually run it as a standard combat, where you either there's too many combatants on either side that you need to control, and it's just too overwhelming, or if there's just there's something different that they have to do. Maybe there's a chase scene or something like that, or as I mentioned, they're trying to stop a lava flow. It's something that maybe the rules don't have rules for, and so that gives you the freedom to create some rules for those scenarios. So let's talk about some rules that you could use for your encounter then. The first one is the easiest probably to implement and to use, and that's just a time limit. As I mentioned earlier, a time limit. It can be incredibly useful. It's excellent for creating tension and like getting the players, like getting their nerves kind of worked up, especially if it's a really low timer. You know, like maybe a D4 or a D6. They don't have a lot of time to do whatever they need to do. But this could be a round counter, like a D4 or a D6 or a D10 or any sided die that you just roll down or roll up, whichever you prefer, at the top or the bottom of the round, however you're doing it. Or it could be an actual timer as well. I've incorporated an hourglass before. It was actually more of like a half hourglass, but you can incorporate an hourglass as well, and that is another way to really put the pressure on your players, because they don't have the freedom in game to just, in between rounds to just like talk with each other and, to strategize in between attacks and stuff like that. The clock is literally ticking right in front of them, and that can really put the pressure on your players to quickly work together and to quickly figure out what they need to do. It's one of my favorite tools, one of my favorite rules to use is a time limit. It can be a very good way to kind of control an encounter and keep it from drawing out into a slog fest that no one will enjoy. One of the other rules or constraints you could put on your players for this unique encounter is location or a terrain. They need to specifically defend a region or attack and overtake a specific region, and that forces the players to work in that area until they achieve their goals. And or it can be more of a local thing, actually. It can be more of a strategic thing, like actually more of a grid-based thing. If you just really play around with the environment and the terrain around them during an encounter, you can really spice things up a bit. Think of like a dragon's lair and how there's lair actions and how there's environmental stuff that, if it's in like a magma chamber or like, deep beneath a volcano, then maybe there's vents of magma that are like shooting up, or there's a river of magma and vents of like noxious gas that are sprouting out everywhere randomly throughout the cave. And depending on where you are, the guy, the DM rolls randomly, and that's where the thing pops up every round. That's an interesting way to spice up the combat a bit, to spice up the encounter, and to make it much more challenging and interesting, in my opinion. And this goes, like I said, it can go well with sieges, but it also goes well with waves, I think. If you were incorporating waves into your unique encounter, if it's a wave defense or a wave assault sort of thing, then you can also use location to tie your players to the castle walls or something like that. I like incorporating stuff like this when I'm building my unique encounters, because it's really good for my strategically minded players, and I find that I typically have at least one or two players at the table who is very intently studying the grid map before they act every round, and they are trying to maximize the distance they can travel, trying to get into flanking, trying to do any number of things to aid their cause, essentially. And it's very engaging for them, especially if you've taken the time to create this interesting terrain that they have to navigate, or that they have to overcome. They have to deal with this terrain, and that can be really interesting. If there's like let's go back to the siege. Maybe you have two defenses, or maybe three defenses, and one of those is on the walls, and another one of those is actually under the walls, where they've managed to blow a crack in the walls, perhaps, and now there's actually a fight going on down there, and then maybe there's another engagement at the gatehouse. And so if your players see that the wall has been broken, but they're at the gatehouse, they need to travel from the gatehouse across the walls and down a set of stairs to reach the floor the castle, essentially, of the keep, and there they can aid the defenses further. That's an interesting way to incorporate the terrain into what might otherwise be just kind of a simple you run and get there, you know? Make it more challenging than that. Make them have to kind of wade through the combat. They have to provoke some attacks of opportunity, perhaps, or they see something else that that needs doing on their way down, and they need to spend a round or two to take care of that first. You see where there's a lot of opportunity to spice things up, to make it more interesting, to make the combat more diverse, to make the encounter more unique. As for other constraints that you can put on your encounter, I don't think that I've actually used a whole lot of others, and I didn't know that there was a whole lot of others until I started to think about it, and then I realized that, you know, you could put all kinds of constraints on these unique encounters. Just because I haven't used any of these doesn't mean that I won't, now that I've thought them up especially. So let me give you a few other rules that you could possibly impose on your players. You could say that they only can use non-lethal damage for some reason. Perhaps the whole village is under some mind-affecting spell, and it's compelling them to attack the party, but the party doesn't want to kill any of these people. These people are their friends, and they're innocent people. They're just being controlled right now. And so the party needs to do non-lethal damage to knock these people out, instead of actually killing them outright. Another rule you could impose: the party must remain undetected. Maybe it's a stealth mission. The party is trying to sneak into the castle as a unit or as a group and try to steal some artifact or some heirloom or item or something that has been stolen from its rightful owner, perhaps. That is an interesting challenge or a rule you could impose on your players. And as soon as they are detected, they only have 3 rounds before the exits are going to be sealed or something like that. And then they only have like 6 rounds before there's a platoon of guards waiting for them in the courtyard. And so as soon as one of them fails that sneak check, all of a sudden that encounter gets a lot more interesting. What's another one? I thought you could do capture the flag. That could be a really easy way, you know? I mean, maybe it's not actually capture the flag. It's capture the X, capture the blank, capture the MacGuffin. So you decide what your players are trying to capture, and maybe they're trying to return it to their base within a set amount of time, perhaps. You could impose multiple of these. In fact, I would encourage imposing a couple of these rules on your player. It'll make it more engaging, and it'll make them, they'll have to think harder to work within those rules. And what are some others? You could use it for attorneys. If you were like in a jousting tournament or an archery tournament or something like that, you could use a skill challenge. Imposing, you know, maybe it's just, it's a lot smaller of a skill challenge or a unique encounter, but it's still a unique encounter. You have to face off against the locals, and then you guys see who rolls the best out of, you know, so many rounds of combat. Rounds of combat. That's just, you know, how you take turns shooting at the target, you know, and whoever wins, wins. Or maybe it's a jousting thing, like I said. That would be cool, I think, you know, to roll up some rules for doing a basic jousting thing. But you could also use it for other things. While my Avatar party was on the island of Nanzu, which you guys will get to later in the campaign series, they participated in a bending tournament, and that was kind of a unique encounter. Each day they participated in another round of this tournament, and each round was kind of like its own unique encounter. There was like 6 rounds of combat in each of those rounds, each one of those bouts, and there were rules. They had to stay in their zones. They could only use their basic bending blasts, and there was a points total based on how many people were still standing. And if you got hit, you had to make a save, then otherwise get knocked back and stuff like that. It got I created a whole set of rules for this encounter essentially. But there's other things too. Drinking games is another one you could do. Make some drinking games for your world, and that can be a unique encounter at your table, perhaps. I did this in my Avatar game as well, and I thought it was quite a bit of fun. It's a nice way to spice things up and to make what might otherwise be kind of a boring, you know, you go to the bar and tavern and you have a few drinks and it's fun, you know, you turn that into like an actual encounter that the players are competing in, essentially. I think that would be a lot of fun. I think it's really cool. So now that we've gone over the rules and the constraints for creating your unique encounter, now we can talk about some of those victory or defeat conditions. And my general rule of thumb is to just kind of keep it simple and keep it straightforward. And I'm going to use Pinyao as an example here. Again, you'll pardon me. It's a very handy example because the video is available online right now, and you guys can watch it if you want, and if you want to, see exactly what I'm talking about. But the victory condition for Pinyao was that cooling the lava or finishing the fire line, or both, before the lava reached the village, before the lava engulfed the village. And then, of course, that makes the defeat condition pretty straightforward. The lava just reaches the village. If they don't manage to defeat the lava in time, the lava will defeat them. It will engulf the village. And then I put the constraint on it, of course. The constraint was simply a time limit. They had 8 rounds, essentially, or, so many rounds, because it was, X number of feet away from the village, and, it had moved Y number of feet per round. And so, take those 2 numbers and you get Z, which is the number of rounds that it was, that it took. And that was my time limit. And it's pretty straightforward, as you can see. You want to keep, that was a very easy, unique encounter. We have a time limit, we have a victory condition, and we have a defeat condition. And the victory condition and the defeat condition kind of hinge on each other. They kind of go hand in hand. So that's pretty much all I have to say about the design of these unique encounters. I just want to take a moment now to talk to you about implementing your own unique encounters in your game. The first step I want you to do is to just write one up. I want you to start making one of these right now for your game. If you've been watching along and you've been listening to what I've been saying, you probably have an idea. You probably have a few ideas of how you could introduce one of these in your game. Hopefully you do. Hopefully this is like some brain fuel for you, so that, get those juices flowing, get those ideas pumping. So I want you to just sit down and come up with a few even. Make up a few of these different unique encounters, and play around with the rules and the constraints on these encounters. Try to mix it up a little bit. Try to see what changes about the encounter when you swap out rules, or if you change rules subtly. And my next thing that I want to mention is that when you're building these up and when you're implementing it, take it easy on your players at first. You have never made one of these before. Your players have never dealt with one of these before, probably, at least, on both of those. But considering that, you want to take it easy. You don't want to throw something too hard at them right out of the gates. You want to take it kind of easy, give them some time to adapt to this new way of thinking, this new style of combat or interacting with the world. And then after they've had maybe 1 or 2 of these, you can start to amp it up a little bit, start to crank that dial towards 11. And it's more of an art than a science, and so that's another reason. You want to just be gentle at first, and you need to you got to have a lot of wiggle room, and you got to, have room to fine-tune it as well. Another reason you take it easy at first is because your party's just going to feel good when they win. It's good for them. It's good for their morale. If you tell them, hey, you're doing a unique encounter, and these are the rules, and then they manage to beat the encounter, they're going to feel great about it, even if it wasn't an incredibly challenging encounter. And like I said, you can amp it up later. So the last thing I want to say, when you're breaking this thing out, as I mentioned, you want to go over the rules. You want to tell your players that they are playing in a unique encounter. You want to let them know, like, hey, this is not like the other stuff you've been doing, this is a little different. And then you want to explain exactly how it is different. This is vital to the success of your unique encounter. If your players don't know the rules of the game, how can they be expected to play it? So this is where I give my players information that maybe other GMs might not give their players. I will explicitly tell my players how long the encounter is going to last. In the village of Pinyao, I said, hey, it looks like it's going to take, this many number of rounds before that lava finally reaches the village. In the bending tournament on Nanzu, I said, hey, there's 6 rounds before this bout of the tournament ends. In my most recent Pathfinder game that I'm playing, I've set my players through a unique encounter where I said, hey, these people are going to be attacking you for 10 rounds. That's a full minute that they're going to be attacking, and you think if you can repel them that long, that they will turn away. I tell my players this ahead of time, and that way they know the rules of the game. They know what their constraints are. This is important. As I mentioned, you cannot forget to do this. Please tell your players the rules. And let them try stuff. Keep it loose when you're doing this, when you're running this. Keep it loose and let them just do whatever they want to do. Let them do what they think would be available, Play it by ear, kind of, You don't want to restrict your players. You want them to have fun, and you want them thinking creatively. And if you want to give them opportunities to do that. And you do that by, letting them do stuff, essentially. Don't just, poo-poo what they say because you didn't think of it, or it's not how you would do it, you know? You don't do it the way you would do it, you know? Maybe give your suggestions in the way of an NPC, but make it clear that your players are the ones who are in control here, that your players are at least independent, have agency over themselves, and they can try stuff if they want to try it. And again, you know, this goes for you as well. Feel free to try stuff. Feel free to add new stuff, you know, even during the encounter. If you feel like the encounter is going too easy, try to mix it up a little bit. Try to amp it up. Try to make it a little more difficult, maybe mid scenario. Introduce some new element that suddenly makes things a lot more challenging. And the last piece of advice that I'm going to leave you with is to just have fun with it. You know, that's why we're doing all this, is to have some fun. And so just keep it loose, keep it loosey-goosey, you know? Like I said, you know, let your players try stuff if they want to try it, and let them succeed. If you think they could, if you think they would, then please let them succeed, you know? Just have fun with it. That's the whole reason we're doing this. We're trying to spice up combat. We're trying to make it more interesting, more engaging. Those are words that kind of coincide with fun, in my opinion. When I'm interested and engaged in something, I'm probably having fun. And that's pretty much all I have to say on creating your own unique encounters. I don't know what my next video will be. I have a few different ideas and a lot of different things topics I want to cover. I may talk about replacing or repurposing game mechanics to make your game a little smoother or better suited towards your needs as a player or a game master. I want to talk about dungeon creation. I want to do a small two-parter on creating your own dungeons. I think that could be a lot of fun. And I also want to do a video on railroads versus sandbox games at some point. Not about the differences about them specifically, but I want to talk about how you run both of them. Because the things that you prepare and the things that you have to ready for your players and the things you have to focus on tend to vary drastically between those. Another video I want to do a mass combat video at some point. I think that would be a lot of fun. I came up with some loose rules that I think work kind of well for determining odds against large numbers of armies that are clashing together, and I think it works pretty well when you find yourself in a situation of having, you know, thousands of combatants and needing to know who is winning and by how much. So those are all possibilities. I don't know which one I will decide on. I don't know. I guess we'll all find out next week, huh? Anyway, in the meantime, I thank you all for listening, and I certainly hope that I'm going to see you again very soon.